In September 2017, two veteran trackers, Whitford and Mason Hargrave, vanished without leaving any trace in the vast and dangerous Okefenokee Swamp. For 4 years they were presumed dead, victims of quicksand, predators, or an unwitnessed accident. But in March 2021, Cole suddenly emerged from the edge of the swamp and collapsed in front of a local patrol station. Alive, but barely recognizable. What he told the police once he could speak left even the most seasoned investigators stunned. Where had Cole been during those 4 years, and what really happened to Mason? Before diving into the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the latest cases. On September 12, 2017, Cole Whitford, 39, and Mason Hargrave, 42, both veteran trackers living in southern Georgia, began what they considered a routine workday. A periodic terrain survey assignment in the Okefenokee Swamp, the largest and most dangerous swamp in the southeastern United States. Both were regarded as individuals who could navigate the swamp with an accuracy and confidence that even many seasoned rangers struggled to match. This mission, according to the schedule submitted to the checkpoint, was simply to verify a reported lightly disturbed trail following heavy rains. To their families and colleagues, this was completely a normal workday for two people far too familiar with the environment. Surveillance cameras at the preserve entrance recorded the management unit's pickup truck passing through the station at 6:05 a.m. Cole was in the back seat, preparing positioning equipment, while Mason stepped out for a quick exchange with the on-duty ranger. Both were wearing specialized gear and carrying light backpacks for a short trip. This was the last recorded image of them in a normal state and fully in control of the mission. According to the plan, they would hike along the Suwannee Canal, cut through a high-ground strip, then loop down to the East Ridge area before returning by late afternoon. Signals from their personal positioning devices showed their route proceeding as planned for the first 3+ hours. 7:12, they crossed the edge of the high ground. 8:47, they entered the transition zone between firm land and soft mud. 9:20, a radio signal was sent back to the checkpoint, reporting they were approaching East Ridge. At 9:32, the system recorded a short, heavily interfered signal packet, the content unclear but still logged as a valid ping. Just 2 minutes later, all signals from both Cole's and Mason's devices simultaneously disappeared from the tracking system. The on-duty ranger immediately attempted to re-establish contact across all active radio frequencies while checking for possible weather-related interference, but no environmental factors were recorded that could explain the simultaneous loss of contact from two independent devices. By late afternoon, when neither returned to the rendezvous point nor sent any updates, their families grew concerned and contacted the checkpoint again to verify. The inability to reach two highly experienced trackers, combined with the abnormal shutdown of both positioning devices, forced the checkpoint to open a mandatory missing persons file per protocol. At 18:20, an official notice was sent to the preserve's authorities. Cole Whitford and Mason Hargrave were missing in Okefenokee Swamp, and management immediately shifted from routine monitoring to emergency search deployment. Immediately after this notice, Okefenokee management activated the initial search phase and set up a temporary command center at Suwannee Canal Recreation Area, the main entry point to the preserve, and also the location that received Cole and Mason's last signal. From the command center, a full terrain map of the area was laid out, marking the tracker's planned route and establishing priority search radii based on the route plus travel time rule applied to all swamp survey missions. Search teams were divided into small groups, each assigned a terrain segment, including shallow water paths, soft mud paths, and natural animal trails. The water team used airboats to run along Suwannee Canal and its side channels, scanning for any floating objects and areas with abnormal flow. The mud team moved on footpaths, checking segments prone to sink marks and noting compressed or disturbed mud patches. The treeline team searched for direct impact signs such as scraped bark, broken branches, or leaf falls inconsistent with that day's wind patterns. From the air, drones with thermal cameras were deployed to detect any heat signatures indicating movement or a stationary person under the canopy, while the K9 team followed Cole and Mason's route based on pre-loss positioning data. However, consistent results from the drones, airboats, and K9 units revealed a grim reality: no live human signals within the search radius, and no abnormal heat signatures detected from above. This prompted the command team to add one more item to check: locating the vehicle Cole and Mason had used to reach the swamp entry point. When the logistics team swept the parking area near the checkpoint, they quickly confirmed the unit's pickup truck was still in place, carefully locked but parked offset from the standard position the trackers typically used for convenient gear loading. Additionally, the parking distance did not match the protocol-required spot for same-day waterline missions, a minor detail, but recorded in the log because it deviated from Cole and Mason's professional habits. The vehicle being left in the wrong position, combined with the sudden loss of contact and the lack of live human signs in the initial search hours, caused the initial deployment phase to end with a complete lack of directional data, forcing rescue forces to expand the sweep area overnight under the preserve's emergency protocol. On the very first night of the search campaign, after the airboat and K9 teams completed their preliminary sweeps but still found no signs of life, the command section shifted focus to delineating areas likely to retain physical impacts from the two trackers or any external factors. The goal at this stage was not analysis, but simply to document all anomalies that could later become evidence. Based on the last positioning data and projected direction of travel, 3 priority zones were marked: a section along Suwannee Canal, with soft ground prone to impressions, a transition area between cypress forest and exposed mudflats that often preserve drag or sink marks, and a narrow high ground strip near East Ridge considered a mandatory crossing point if Cole and Mason followed their registered route. The ground search team reached the soft ground area first, and immediately noticed an unusually disturbed patch of vegetation. There, they found the first piece of evidence: a light gray fabric fragment caught on the lower branch of a cypress trunk. The fibers were stretched horizontally, and the tear surface showed fraying inconsistent with natural light friction or sharp branch tearing. As raw evidence, the field team only recorded shape, color, and absolute position. GPS coordinates, height above ground, day's wind direction to avoid log discrepancies, then photographed it from 3 angles and sealed the fragment in a specialized evidence bag. The second area, about 300 meters south of E1, was a patch of thick mud with average sink depth. The mud team identified a drag mark approximately 2.3 meters long. This was not a boot print or boat drag. The surface was deeply compressed along a gentle curve, with mud splattered to both sides and an abrupt end, suggesting a heavy object had been pulled southeast before disappearing from the soft ground. This was designated the second piece of evidence, coded E2. The team recorded length, depth, impact direction, took overview and close-up photos, marked the spot with reflective stakes, and logged coordinates. The third area, beside a side channel of Suwannee Canal, yielded the third piece of evidence: an old rope segment tangled in tree roots at the water's edge. The rope showed uneven rot, some inner fibers still strong, while the outer layers were degraded from prolonged moisture. The surface had dark, slightly viscous streaks with a very distinctive greasy oil smell. As this was not yet the analysis phase, the field team fully documented physical characteristics: length, degree of rot, color, root attachment point, water flow direction, and submersion level. The rope segment was coded E3, clamped to preserve original structure, then sealed in a long evidence tube. The fourth area was the one that caused the field team to pause longer than expected. On a high ground strip next to the forest edge, about a kilometer from E2, the sweep team discovered a fairly clear boot print on dry soil. This print was larger than both Cole's and Mason's shoe sizes, and crucially, the tread pattern did not match any standard issue boots provided to trackers or rangers by the unit. The soil in this area was quite stable with minimal animal disturbance, so boot print E4 was considered high potential evidence for determining whether a third individual was present. The field team carefully erected a temporary canopy to shield from wind and direct sunlight, photographed from multiple angles, used scale rulers, and cast the print with specialized molding compound to preserve the most accurate shape. After collecting all 4 raw pieces of evidence, the field team completed the first delineation summary. E1 through E4 all lay on or near Cole and Mason's projected route, but were distributed in a southeast direction, slightly offset from the official registered path. All coordinates were entered into the command center's digital mapping system, along with collection times and environmental conditions. The evidence was transferred that same night to temporary storage at the checkpoint for later forwarding to the analysis lab. Upon completing the final collection procedures, the field team noted no additional clear physical signs warranting coding as evidence, but these 4 initial indicators suggested the area where the 2 trackers vanished had multiple impacts inconsistent with ordinary natural activity. All Phase 1 data was handed over to the analysis section per protocol, marking the end of raw evidence collection before moving to more specialized steps. When the 4 pieces of evidence E1 through E4 were delivered to the Okefenokee Management Unit's laboratory, with some additionally sent to the Georgia State Analysis Center, the forensic team began analysis in priority order based on potential for providing directional data. First was E2, the 2.3-meter drag mark on thick mud, considered a mechanical sign likely to directly reflect physical interaction between subject and environment. The field mechanics team reconstructed a comparable model by recreating soil conditions, moisture and mud structure at the exact time of recording to determine impact direction, groove depth, and required pulling force. Results showed uneven deep compression, the start deeper than the end, indicating the drag began with strong force then gradually lessened. Based on sink depth and mud displacement on both sides, the team calculated the pulled object's weight at approximately 70-90 kilograms, within the range of an adult human body, but unable to match any equipment Cole or Mason carried on the survey. The drag direction was confirmed along a southeast axis, 14 degrees off the tracker's projected route, making a natural environmental cause implausible. Next, the materials team analyzed E1, the torn fabric fragment caught on a low branch. Under microscopy, the fiber cross-section revealed a polyester-cotton blend commonly used in specialized outdoor movement jackets. The tear pattern lacked the straight rip of simple tension. Instead, it showed multiple lightly twisted fiber segments, a hallmark of accelerated pulling force, typically occurring when clothing is yanked hard, while the body is moving or restrained. The team tested 3 tear models: branch snag, slip and fall tear, and drag tear. Only the third produced fiber morphology, similar to E1. This indicated the fragment was most likely torn from clothing during lateral pulling force, not self-torn during normal movement. Although ownership could not yet be confirmed as Cole's or Mason's, the material characteristics matched uniforms issued to trackers for survey missions. Evidence E3, the oil-stained rope segment, was sent to the chemical analysis group. The oil on the surface was not standard lubricant used for boats or equipment from the management unit. Spectral and chromatographic analysis identified it as a mineral-based machine oil, with organic phosphorus additives, typical of oils used in older engines from the 1980s, 1990s, or heavy mechanical equipment, no longer common. This ruled out contamination from airboats or the tracker's survey gear. Additionally, the rope's inner fibers were not fully degraded, indicating it had not been abandoned in the wild for an extended period. The oil adhesion level suggested contact with an oil source relatively close to the recovery date, not an old object discarded years earlier. The analysis team then moved to E4, the large boot print left on dry soil. Using optical techniques and tread sample comparison, the examiners determined the print featured a lug-style radial tread pattern common in heavy-duty work boots, but not matching any unit-issued or personal footwear samples from Cole or Mason. Estimated size was equivalent to U.S. men's 12, 13, larger than both trackers' sizes, and impression depth indicated greater body weight. Uneven compression at the edges suggested deliberate firm strides, not the cautious steps of someone navigating difficult terrain. Step direction, based on deeper toe than heel, aligned with northeast, directly opposite the return direction Cole and Mason were expected to take. After completing individual analyses, the forensic team synthesized the data. None of the 4 pieces of evidence showed signs of random environmental or wildlife activity. Instead, they shared 3 key commonalities. First, all were near the tracker's path, but did not align with the registered route. Second, all reflected mechanical impacts exceeding what could occur in a routine survey. And third, none could be explained by Cole's or Mason's actions based on their equipment, weight, and professional habits. The torn fabric showed signs of sharp yanking. The drag mark indicated pulling a human body weight object. The oil-stained rope suggested contact with non-agency mechanical equipment, and the large boot print proved the presence of a third individual in the area around the time of disappearance. The analyzed data was compiled into a summary report with a preliminary conclusion. The area where the 2 trackers vanished showed intervention by an unidentified individual who moved within the zone outside permitted boundaries and likely had direct contact with Cole and Mason's route before their communication signals disappeared. Based on the physical evidence analysis results indicating the possible presence of a third individual in the disappearance area, the investigative team shifted to the peripheral screening phase to identify people who were present or frequently active near Okefenokee Swamp, but not part of the official management system. The area surrounding the swamp is well known for harboring many individuals living on the margins of society, people who build temporary shelters, live in the woods, engage in illegal hunting or unregistered freelance labor, and move between swamp regions seasonally. The initial list was compiled from Charlton and Ware County databases, combined with ranger reports of warnings or citations issued in recent years. A total of 27 subjects fell within the scope of review. The investigative team divided the list into smaller groups based on risk level, including prior convictions involving violence, history of conflicts with rangers, unauthorized entry into the preserve, and unusual indicators such as concealing true residences, sudden changes in lifestyle patterns, or possession of homemade mechanical devices. From public records, the majority of these 27 individuals had fixed movement ranges and were regularly documented in nearby towns, with clear alibis on September 12, 2017. Some had minor prior offenses such as fights, illegal weapon possession, or unlicensed hunting, but their actions around the time of the disappearance were corroborated by witnesses or location data showing they were not in the core swamp area. The next 7 individuals were assessed as higher risk due to reports of them having set up illegal campsites near the preserve boundary or histories of using small boats at night. However, when the investigative team conducted interviews, checked transactions, work schedules, and even nearby traffic camera data on access roads, 6 of the 7 were able to prove they were elsewhere on the day Cole and Mason went missing. One was working as a day laborer at a construction site in Folkestone, one was receiving medical treatment at a community clinic, 2 were with family in Jacksonville as documented by traffic citations, 1 remained at his shack and was seen by a nearby farmer at midday, and the last had video footage recorded at a store nearly 30 kilometers from the swamp. As the list narrowed, the investigative team returned to the sole individual whose whereabouts could not be verified. A man named Harlan Vickers, approximately 50 years old, living in isolation in a self-built wooden cabin on the northwest edge of Okefenokee. Vickers' public records were quite sparse. He had no employment registration, no tax history for many years, and had been warned twice by rangers for unauthorized entry into the preserve for hunting, but was never formally charged. What drew greater attention from investigators was that Vickers had been documented as possessing numerous old mechanical devices and rare metal parts, items that could be consistent with the type of oil and rope structure found at the scene. When the investigative team attempted to verify Vickers' whereabouts on September 12, 2017 through local residents, Neighbors stated that he frequently disappeared for days at a time, and no one could confirm his presence at the cabin during the disappearance period. His medical records, purchase transactions, telecommunications usage, and even administrative activities during that period were completely blank. He was the only individual among the 27 who could not establish an alibi or provide verifiable information about his personal schedule. Nevertheless, to ensure objectivity, the investigative team only noted Vickers as a subject requiring further monitoring and could not yet attribute any direct connection. The peripheral screening concluded with the determination that the remaining 26 subjects were excluded based on solid evidence, leaving only one individual whose absence could not be explained and coincided with the day Cole and Mason vanished, an element to be documented for subsequent investigative steps. After completing the peripheral screening and determining that only one individual could not prove his whereabouts, but there was still insufficient basis to draw any conclusions, the rescue forces were forced to refocus on the core of the case, continuing the search for the two trackers in the swamp environment with a significantly expanded scope. The command center decided to triple the search area compared to the initial phase, extending into regions where Cole and Mason might have moved if they had deviated from the route or been affected by an unexpected factor. The water trail team was assigned to survey deeper into small channels where weak currents could retain objects or traces. Airboats had to move slowly to avoid disturbing the water and mud surface, while the sonar team scanned areas with unusually varying depths due to the soft peat layer below containing many voids. Simultaneously, the land team was deployed into difficult terrain, areas rarely entered by outsiders. Peat sink zones, where the ground could collapse at any moment, were approached using pressure measuring equipment to avoid the risk of searchers falling into natural traps. Trembling earth patches, where every step caused the ground to quiver slightly and water beneath to shift, required the team to use probing poles to assess surface stability before advancing. Dense brush areas, where light was severely reduced and undergrowth covered nearly all signs of movement, were systematically grid-searched by marking each cell, cutting small trails to check for broken branches, crushed leaves, or disturbed soil. However, despite the increased search scope and the level of effort by the rescue forces, many days of extended surveying yielded no additional direct signs related to Cole or Mason. No discarded gear fragments, no new footprints, no drag marks or other mechanical impacts similar to the initial 4 pieces of evidence. The complete silence of the environment further underscored to the command team the extreme difficulty of searching in Okefenokee, where any trace could disappear within hours due to sinking mud, closing vegetation, or natural water level changes. Weather also began to become a major obstacle. Scattered rains, followed by thick fog, reduced drone visibility, while increased humidity made mud traces hard to preserve. Areas previously observable from the air were now completely obscured by tree canopies and vapor. The southeastern swamp region became particularly hard to access as water levels rose, limiting airboat use and forcing land teams to take longer detours, increasing travel time to each position. After 6 days of comprehensive expansion, the consolidated report showed no significant progress in data, while the consumption of manpower and equipment continued to grow. These factors forced the command to reassess the feasibility of further expanding the search scope. An internal meeting among representatives from the managing unit, rescue team, and analysis department concluded that maintaining large-scale searching under the current terrain and weather conditions was no longer effective. Safety risks to rescue personnel also increased daily, especially in deep peat sink areas and regions with increased wildlife activity after rain. Therefore, the official decision was made: scale back the search, reduce the remaining teams, and shift to periodic monitoring cycles instead of proactive further expansion. This marked a turning point signifying the limitations of traditional search methods in a vast swamp environment like Okefenokee, and also the closing of the phase of maximum effort to find direct traces of Cole and Mason in the initial days following the disappearance. After the decision to reduce search scale was issued, the command section began compiling all data collected during nearly 2 weeks of deployment in the Okefenokee Swamp area to prepare the official report on the first investigative phase. This report included the initial travel routes of Cole, Whitford and Mason Hargrave, confirmed signal checkpoints on the morning of September 12, 2017, results of water trail, land trail, drone and K9 searches, along with detailed locations of evidence items E1 through E4. All maps, scene photographs, GPS coordinates, team movement logs, and daily environmental conditions were reviewed to determine if any information gaps remained that could generate new investigative directions. But the conclusion was that no additional data was strong enough to justify continued expansion or redeployment without endangering search teams. The technical evaluation highlighted 3 factors preventing further progress in the investigation. First, the swamp terrain characteristics causing physical traces to distort or vanish completely within hours. Second, constantly fluctuating weather rendering most surveillance tools ineffective. And third, the complete absence of independent witnesses or electronic data that could confirm Cole and Mason's movements after 9/32. In that context, the investigative forces were compelled to conclude that the disappearance no longer met the minimum requirements to maintain active investigative status. Per standard Georgia state procedure, the file was transferred to cold case status after all direct data collection methods had been exhausted without yielding new leads within the designated time frame. The status change date was recorded in the minutes, and official notification was sent to the families of the 2 trackers and relevant units. Evidence items E1 through E4 were resealed according to long-term storage standards. Each item placed in a separate moisture-proof box, labeled with identification code, scene code, collection time, and the name of the responsible technician. All were transferred to the Charlton County Evidence Storage Facility, where unsolved case records for the Okefenokee area are kept. The initial investigative phase file closed with the assignment of case code OCF 217 and a note that any future activity, if any, would only be activated upon the emergence of new evidence or new witnesses. This marked the point when the disappearance of Cole, Whitford and Mason Hargrave officially entered frozen information status, terminating all on-site operations after nearly 2 weeks of deployment without obtaining any indication that the 2 trackers remained in the area or retained any capability to send further signals to authorities. Nearly 4 years after case OCF 217 was moved to cold case status, in early March 2021, an unexpected event occurred on the southern edge of Okefenokee Swamp that immediately brought renewed attention to the entire case. A preserve patrol officer, while performing a routine check of an entrance near Refuge Road, discovered a man collapsed at the edge of a reed bed in a state of exhaustion so severe he could not stand on his own. The man was wearing old, mud-caked clothing, had low body temperature, and responded slowly to surrounding stimuli. His arms and neck bore numerous old scars mixed with fresh injuries. He had no identification documents, no communication devices, and not even any personal items that could aid identification. Due to his critically weakened condition, he was immediately transported to the nearest medical facility in Folkestone before he could answer any questions. While the emergency team worked to stabilize his vital signs, authorities noted one crucial detail: the location where the man was found lay not far from the eastern boundary of the 2017 search area, but no legal trails led there, meaning he had moved out from deep within the swamp along a rarely used direction. Recognizing the potential connection to an old missing persons case, the hospital collected biological samples for DNA testing per protocol for unidentified individuals. The sample was urgently sent to the state laboratory, where the database still retained DNA samples from Cole Whitford and Mason Hargrave from the initial investigation phase. 2 days later, the results were returned. The reference sample matched completely with Cole Whitford's DNA profile. Official identification was confirmed and immediately reported to the Charlton County Sheriff's Office. The news that one of the 2 trackers missing for 4 years had been found alive quickly triggered the case reactivation procedure under Georgia state regulations, which require any long-term missing person confirmed alive to have their file reopened as an active case to determine the cause of disappearance, activities during the missing period, and the possibility of criminal elements. Immediately after the reactivation notice was issued, case code OCF 217W was transferred from cold case to active investigation status, and all evidence items E1 through E4 were ordered to be re-inventoried in preparation for the next analysis phase. In the case reactivation minutes, authorities noted that Cole Whitford was found in a state of severe debilitation, not yet capable of providing investigative value statements, and all hypotheses regarding his survival must be independently verified through scientific data. Cole's appearance precisely at the edge of the old search area after 4 years with no traces forced the investigative direction to expand into scenarios never previously considered, particularly the possibility of prolonged captivity or deliberate human intervention. Before any statements could be collected, the top priority was established as an objective assessment of Cole's physical condition to clarify what he had endured throughout the missing period. Therefore, as soon as Cole Whitford was stabilized for survival at Folkestone Regional Hospital, his file was immediately transferred to the forensic medical specialist team for a comprehensive evaluation, starting with the documentation of surface injuries and continuing with the analysis of bone structure, muscles, and soft tissues to determine the timeline and nature of each injury. On the skin, the doctors observed the presence of 3 distinct groups of injuries. The first group consisted of fresh scratches, still red, appearing within the last 7-10 days, most likely formed when Cole attempted to push through the dense vegetation at the edge of the swamp before being found. The second group comprised faint bruises aged 2-3 weeks, and most notably, the third group included long, thin scars running along the forearms, back, and calves, with coloration indicating they had formed many years earlier. These scars showed uniform characteristics, sharp edges, even spacing, and signs of prolonged skin stretching, consistent with injuries caused by repeated friction in a confined space or prolonged restraint of the limbs. Moving to the musculoskeletal evaluation, the forensic team noted significant muscle atrophy in the legs and arms, particularly in the quadriceps and calf muscle groups, a condition that typically only appears in cases of patients with extremely prolonged restricted mobility. Bone density was also markedly reduced, common in individuals with minimal exposure to sunlight or severe vitamin D deficiency. The bone mineralization index was 28% below the average for men of the same age, equivalent to levels seen in cases of long-term confinement in conditions lacking natural light. Additionally, the lower spinal structure showed asymmetrical wear, suggesting that Cole had to sit or lie in a spatially restricted position for an extended period, resulting in uneven distribution of body weight pressure. Nutritional assessment based on blood tests and adipose tissue revealed that Cole had experienced multiple phases of severe deprivation, evidenced by irregular cycles of weight loss and gain and persistently low protein indices. Serum tests showed signs of chronic malnutrition with deficiencies in vitamins A, D, and B12, along with ferritin levels reduced to those typically seen in individuals confined under conditions of limited dietary variety. The skin around the ankles and wrists displayed circular dark bands, not caused by natural abrasions but by repeated pressure from straps or circular restraints. Some marks had even edges, indicating the restraining devices were not sharp, but had broad contact surfaces, most likely metal rings or old cinching cords. At multiple locations around the ankles, the stratum corneum had abnormally thickened, and scar tissue indicated that these injuries had developed over many years, not from weeks or months of impact. Based on layered skin tissue analysis, the forensic team determined that cycles of tightening and loosening had occurred repeatedly with long intervals, consistent with a confinement pattern in which the captive was restrained at specific times rather than continuously. Hair samples were sent for testing to determine nutritional cycles by centimeter of length. The results revealed clear phases of nutritional deficiency lasting 6-8 months each, corresponding to periods when Cole received only minimal food intake. At the same time, the hair samples showed no evidence of direct sunlight exposure over a long period, melanin pigments exhibited slower than normal oxidation, and there was no sunburn layer at the tips. These two indicators reinforced the conclusion that Cole had been confined in a dark or semi-dark environment for an extended time. The estimation of confinement duration was performed by synthesizing data, the degree of musculoskeletal degeneration, nutritional cycles in the hair scar layers, and skin characteristics. All three data groups yielded congruent results, indicating that Cole had not only been missing for 4 years, but had been subjected to severe mobility restriction for the majority of that time. The forensic team estimated a minimum of 3 years of confinement in an enclosed environment, with a high likelihood that it approached the full 4 years of disappearance. This was supported by signs of prolonged light deprivation, which would be difficult to achieve if Cole had only been temporarily sheltering or lost in the wild. The final medical conclusions recorded in the forensic report showed consistency across all analyzed samples. Cole not only survived the 4 years of disappearance, but nearly the entire period involved confinement in a restricted space, lacking light, lacking nutrition, with cyclical limb restraint, and evidence of intentional injury. There was no evidence whatsoever supporting the possibility that he survived independently in nature for such a prolonged period. Based on these conclusions, the forensic team officially determined that Cole Whitford was the victim of prolonged confinement in an enclosed space, and the information obtained from his body is pivotal in re-evaluating the entire nature of the 2017 disappearance case. When Cole Whitford's physical condition had temporarily stabilized and he was able to communicate in short intervals, the investigative team began the first statement-taking session, focusing entirely on sensory memories to avoid mental pressure and refraining from asking him to recall events in chronological order, which his condition could not yet support. From the very first responses, Cole demonstrated that his memories were not continuous but existed as disjointed fragments, each tied to a specific sensation rather than clear visuals. He first recalled a sound, a very small metallic latch clicking, right before the moment he lost contact on the morning of September 12, 2017. Following that sound was the sensation of a strong pull on his legs, then his entire body being twisted and thrown before falling onto soft ground. Cole could not describe direction, only remembering the sound of earth being disturbed very close to his ear, followed by the sound of fabric being cinched as a bag was pulled over his head. From that point onward, virtually all memories stemmed from hearing. He described a steady, repetitive dripping of water at a constant rhythm, the sound not echoing far, but bouncing back in a confined space, suggesting a hard material enclosure. In addition to the water, Cole mentioned a strong, damp sulfur smell, not like an open swamp, but like the accumulation of organic gas in an enclosed space. Regarding humidity, he recalled that upon first waking, the surface beneath him was hard but cold, with dampness rising not from soil vapor, but like leaking water vapor. He saw nothing but darkness, only distinguishing space by touching the surrounding surfaces, according to his description. The plains had slight ripples, like metal that had corroded or rusted over time. When speaking of the person who captured him, Cole could not describe a face or clear figure, but he remembered the footsteps, heavy, steady rhythm, usually stopping right at the door of the confinement space. Each time the door opened, There was a faint creak of old metal hinges and the clank of something hard hitting the floor, possibly a food tray. Cole did not recall the perpetrator's voice, only stating that he never heard him speak a complete sentence. The man moved sparingly, acted repetitively, and produced little sound beyond the door and footsteps. In several scattered memory fragments, Cole recalled the appearance of something like a cord or cinching loop, repeatedly tightened around his ankles. During those times, the faint sound of metal sliding across the floor was clear to him because no other noises interfered. Regarding confinement conditions, he described the space as so small that he could not stand fully upright and had to sit or lie with his legs curled for most of the time. The air was consistently damp, cold, and almost without airflow. Occasionally, he heard strong water flow somewhere behind the metal wall, suggesting a leak system or a larger void outside. When asked about Mason Hargrave, Cole began to tremble slightly and took several minutes to respond. He remembered Mason was still alive in the early period, held in a separate chamber, but not too far away because Cole heard Mason calling his name upon first waking. Then came chaotic noises, hard objects falling, dragging sounds, and heavy impacts, before all sounds from Mason ceased completely. Cole remembered no dialogue, did not know if Mason resisted or not. He only recalled the terror when the perpetrator's footsteps returned, but Mason's sounds were gone. The investigative team did not press Cole for further description, but instead focused on recording all the sensory details he provided. They divided the data into 4 main groups: sound group, smell and gas group, physical contact group, and Mason-related events group. Each sensory group was documented, coded, and prepared for entry into an independent analysis system, aimed at determining whether any fixed points in those fragmented memories could be used to infer the location of confinement, the type of enclosing structure, and the degree of contact the perpetrator had with the 2 trackers in the early stage of the disappearance. The sensory data obtained from Cole Whitford's fragmented statement was forwarded directly to the specialized sensory mapping team, which was mobilized in cases lacking any image, location, or direct witness data. This team began by breaking down all of Cole's descriptions into measurable physical parameters: sound frequency, reverberation characteristics, odor type and origin, humidity and temperature levels, and contact surface features. The initial focus was on sound, as Cole clearly remembered the steady dripping water at a constant rhythm, not traveling far, only echoing in a narrow range, and the faint creak of metal hinges each time the door opened. Specialists constructed acoustic models based on 3 common structure types around Okefenokee: natural rock cavities, self-built wooden enclosures, and semi-submerged metal chambers. The results showed that steady, short-range dripping water only occurred when the sound source was inside a metal-surfaced chamber of small area, as this material reflects acoustics very quickly and does not allow sound to linger. Simultaneously, the frequency of the hinge creak Cole described matched old steel hinges exposed to water vapor or organic acids for a long time without lubrication. These 2 parameters completely ruled out confinement in wooden structures or natural soil cavities, as wood absorbs sound better and soil nearly fully dampens metal sounds. The acoustic model was overlaid onto the Okefenokee terrain map, narrowing down areas likely to contain metal-surfaced structures, very rare in a swamp environment, primarily near former manual extraction sites, abandoned storage yards, or cabins left since the 1980s. The next data point was the sulfur smell Cole described. This odor was not the usual organic swamp smell, but characteristic of accumulated peat gas, typically found in peat dome areas where thick peat layers cover hollow cavities and release methane, along with hydrogen sulfide. The geology team mapped regions based on prior sulfate emission indices, identifying the 4 most active peat gas zones forming an arc near the northeastern edge of the swamp. When cross-referenced with the constructed acoustic model, Only 2 of the 4 zones had the potential to contain sufficiently sealed metal spaces to retain the intense sulfur smell, as Cole described. Humidity was also a key factor. Cole described continuously damp flooring, cold surfaces, and a sensation of water seeping from behind the wall, consistent with a semi-submerged metal structure in soil or placed directly on soft peat, where water vapor rises steadily. In a floating cabin or temporary wooden shelter, humidity would vary with weather. In a natural soil cavity, the floor would not produce the cold metal sensation Cole reported. Cross-referencing the 3 factors, acoustics, odor, and humidity, the analysis team further filtered locations using Okefenokee's hydrographic map to exclude areas with strong seasonal water level fluctuations, as Cole made no mention of major changes in floor conditions or temperature that he would have noticed if the structure were near free water. Combining all data, the analysis team narrowed dozens of square kilometers of swamp down to 3 suspect areas with the best match to Cole's descriptions. The first suspect area was near an ancient peat dome strip, where there had been reports of an old abandoned metal structure from the manual extraction era, though no modern data confirmed its existence. The second area was the semi-submerged region east of a tributary stream, where geological maps recorded numerous empty peat cavities conducive to short echo sounds and retention of sulfur gas. The third area lay deeper south, where some 1980s maps showed a thin steel structure of unclear purpose, locally called a pit shelter, though the area had been virtually inaccessible for many years. All 3 locations were far from Cole and Mason's planned route, consistent with the direction suggested by drag mark E2, and within the region where footprint E4 could appear if a third party had taken a detour to avoid detection. The sensory mapping team noted that, although Cole could not provide visual memories, the sensory fragments he described aligned significantly with measurable physical characteristics in the swamp environment. The final report concluded that the 3 suspect areas had high priority and required on-site survey to determine how closely the sensory models matched real spaces. Thus, for the first time since 2017, the case had a coordinate system not based on speculation, but built from acoustic, geological, and environmental data, all derived from the disjointed memory fragments of Cole Whitford. With the 3 suspect areas already identified through the sensory mapping model, the investigative team proceeded to re-evaluate all physical evidence items E1 through E4 using updated 2021 forensic technologies in order to establish the degree of connection between the 2017 crime scene data and the new information obtained from Cole Whitford. The focus of this step was to determine whether the 4 pieces of evidence, previously lacking context when collected, were genuinely related to the disappearance of the 2 trackers, while also assessing whether 1 or more items could be linked to any specific individual active near Okefenokee during that period. The first task was the reanalysis of evidence E4, the shoe print not belonging to Cole or Mason, using the newly implemented AI footprint identification system at the state laboratory. This system employs a deep learning model capable of comparing hundreds of thousands of tread patterns and analyzing soil compression depth to determine gait type, shoe style, and the estimated weight of the person who left the print. When the E4 data was input, the AI analyzed over 42 different parameters, including edge compression ratio, groove divergence, load-bearing soil deformation pattern, and the hardness of the soil layer immediately beneath the impression. The results showed that the E4 shoe print had a high similarity to a type of heavy-duty work boot produced in limited runs during the 1990s, commonly worn by outdoor mechanics or industrial maintenance technicians. The soil compression characteristics also indicated that the wearer's weight ranged from 90 to 105 kilograms, significantly higher than that of Cole or Mason. When the AI system cross-referenced the data against the Georgia State Footprint Database and those of neighboring states, the algorithm suggested a matching pattern belonging to an individual previously documented for unauthorized entry at the edge of Okefenokee in 2012 and 2014. That individual was a man named Harlan Vickers, the only person among the 27 peripheral individuals screened in 2017 who lacked a verifiable alibi. Although the result could not yet be considered positive identification, the 87% match made E4, for the first time, a piece of evidence with direct investigative value. Next, the analysis team turned to evidence E3, the oil-stained rope segment. 2021 mass spectrometry and chromatography technology allowed not only identification of the oil components, but also the origin and aging level of its additives. In-depth testing revealed that the oil on E3 was not a type used for boat engines or common vehicles, but rather an industrial lubricating oil containing characteristic organophosphorus additives, typically found in older mechanical equipment such as mini-generators, low-horsepower lifting motors, or moving parts in fixed metal structures. The additive profile matched devices commonly encountered in ad hoc mechanical operations or temporary structures built by individuals, especially in humid environments where the oil requires stronger antioxidation properties. When the forensic team compared this oil type with samples collected from prior unauthorized equipment inspections at the swamp's edge, a 2014 oil sample taken from an abandoned old engine near the area where Vickers had reportedly set up a camp showed an almost identical chemical spectrum. While this was insufficient to prove Vickers owned the rope segment, it established a technical link between the evidence and his documented activities in prior years. Evidence E2, the drag mark in the mud, was also reanalyzed using 3D reconstruction modeling. The new technology enabled reconstruction of the curvature and applied force from the 2017 scene photographs with greater accuracy thanks to nonlinear material simulation algorithms. The model showed that the drag mark had varying depth consistent with pulling a heavy object equivalent to an adult human body weight, with initial strong force gradually decreasing, matching the pattern of drag resistance against initial opposition before the object was fully pulled out of the soft mud zone. The 14-degree angle relative to the natural water flow axis indicated human pulling force rather than current or large animal, such as an alligator movement, which would produce entirely different mark patterns. The direction of the drag mark closely aligned with the axis suggested by footprint E4 if the person who left the print had been moving in that area while dragging a heavy load. The analysis team concluded that E2 most likely reflected the forced movement of one of the two trackers carried out by an individual heavier than they were. E1, the torn fabric fragment, although previously analyzed in 2017, was submitted to the new material comparison system. Polymer fiber analysis technology precisely identified the weave code and cotton-polyester ratio, showing the fabric belonged to a specialized jacket line issued to tracker teams during 2015-2017. This perfectly matched the clothing worn by Cole and Mason on the day they disappeared. However, it was impossible to determine which individual the fragment came from. Notably, the tear pattern of E1, when simulated by artificial intelligence, matched the type of lateral pulling force exerted by a person standing behind or beside, further increasing the likelihood of third-party intervention. After individually reanalyzing each piece of evidence, the forensic team moved to the synthesis phase, linking the findings to the sole remaining suspect profile, Harlan Vickers. Three prominent results formed a logical chain. Footprint E4 matched Vickers' known shoe pattern at 87%. The oil on E3 matched the spectrum of old mechanical equipment documented near Vickers' residence, and the human drag model in E2 aligned with the body weight and movement habits of a heavy boot-wearing mechanical laborer. Although insufficient for a legal conclusion, these linkages gave the investigative team, for the first time, a scientifically grounded suspect direction. The evidence collected from the 2017 scene was not random trace material, but potentially related to the actions of an individual who had repeatedly appeared around Okefenokee and could not account for his whereabouts. At the time, the two trackers vanished. The reanalysis report was completed with the conclusion that E1 through E4 were not merely indicative but formed a preliminary evidentiary structure sufficient to direct the investigation toward a specific set of locations and a particular suspect profile, opening a phase of higher priority scene and geographic evaluation than at any point since 2017. Following the 2021 evidence reanalysis report, which highlighted significant matches between the sensory mapping model, footprint E4, and technical characteristics tied to the likely suspect's mechanical activities, the investigative force decided to deploy a scene survey team to the 3 previously identified suspect areas. The objective was to locate any remaining traces of a confinement space or additional evidence related to the disappearance of both Cole Whitford and Mason Hargrave. The survey process followed a concentric radial expansion model in which each area was divided into 20 per tier 20-meter survey grids and evaluated in 3 layers: surface vegetation, mud, peat structure, and deeper substrate. The first and third locations showed no unusual geological anomalies beyond natural water depressions, but the survey team spent considerably more time at the second suspect area, where prior analytical models indicated strong peat gas presence and an environment consistent with the acoustics Cole described. There, the geology team used compaction meters and probing rods to identify zones potentially containing subsurface voids beneath thick peat. A roughly 6 square meter area yielded anomalous results. The probe penetrated deeper than normal before abruptly stopping at a depth of nearly 1.5 meters, suggesting the presence of a material layer different from natural mud. When the survey team excavated the surface soil, they noted a stronger than normal release of organic gas odor, consistent with an area that had long contained a buried object. At approximately 1.3 meters depth, on-site forensic personnel discovered a long bone fragment embedded in the dark mud layer. As the second and third bone fragments were exposed, the team commander ordered a halt to mechanical digging and switched to manual excavation protocol to avoid damaging any potential skeletal structure beneath the surface. Over the following 4 hours, a complete adult human skeleton was fully exhumed within a natural peat sink, including skull, ribs, long bones of the upper and lower limbs. Notably, no clothing or personal items were present, apparently leaving the victim unprotected, and the skeleton's off-axis position indicated the body had been dragged or dropped from a direction not aligned with the natural peat slope. On-site forensic technicians recorded a large skull fracture extending from the temporal region down near the cheekbone, describing a high-force blunt trauma pattern. Bone samples were sealed and transferred to the lab the same day for DNA analysis. Since Mason Hargrave's DNA profile had been on file since 2017, comparison proceeded rapidly, with identification results returned in just 3 days. The remains were those of Mason Hargrave, who had disappeared alongside Cole and was presumed no longer survivable after 4 years without trace. This finding immediately reclassified the case into the legal category of a homicide investigation rather than merely a missing persons or prolonged detention matter. When the forensic division completed microscopic bone analysis and force simulation, the final report determined the cause of death to be severe traumatic brain injury from direct blunt force impact, with sufficient force to cause longitudinal skull fracturing and underlying soft tissue damage, resulting in rapid death. No signs indicated animal-inflicted trauma, as the fracture surfaces did not match predator bite or tear patterns common in swamp environments. Instead, the injury shape pointed to human-delivered impact with a relatively broad contact surface. Additionally, long bones such as the femur and forearm showed segmental marrow detachment, indicating Mason had endured a prolonged period of malnutrition and restricted movement prior to death. The surrounding peat layer was analyzed to estimate the relative burial time frame. Based on the degree of organic tissue decomposition within the mud and the rate of characteristic microbial layer formation, Mason was determined to have died approximately 1 to 2 years after going missing, meaning he did not die immediately upon separation from Cole, but lived for an indeterminate period under unknown conditions before being killed. This conclusion reinforced that Mason's death was not accidental, but the result of intentional homicide. Upon submission of the forensic report to command, the case was officially upgraded to a murder investigation with victim Mason Hargrave, and all scene data, including skeletal location, peat sink burial characteristics, drag direction and injury pattern, was entered into the investigative system for expanded analysis. This represented the most significant turning point since the disappearance was recorded in 2017, providing the first irrefutable evidence that one of the two trackers had died from violent human action. And the discovery of Mason Hargrave's remains in the suspect area strongly corroborated the assumption that the 2017 evidence and Cole's statements were not disparate fragments, but parts of a consistent chain of events culminating in Mason's murder in the Okefenokee Swamp. The discovery of Mason Hargrave's remains caused the investigative team to focus entirely on the second suspect area, the location with the highest correlation between sensory mapping and evidence data, with the goal of determining whether any artificial structure related to Cole's confinement period still existed. During expanded aerial survey with thermal camera-equipped drones, an unusual anomaly was recorded beneath a large cypress tree, approximately 230 meters southeast of Mason's exhumation site. Appeared a semicircular heat outline that remained more stable than the surrounding ground and exhibited slow heat dissipation, a feature inconsistent with natural biological structures such as tree roots or animal dens. The anomaly became more pronounced in late afternoon when surrounding soil cooled rapidly, but the area beneath the tree retained several degrees Celsius higher temperature, suggesting a subsurface void or metallic object. The survey team decided to approach the anomaly site the following morning to avoid collapse risk due to weak peat substrate. After clearing initial vegetation, they found a slightly depressed area with unusually hard texture immediately beneath shallow roots. A metal probe returned a strong signal, confirming the presence of a flat metallic surface approximately 40 to 50 centimeters below ground level. Excavation had to proceed manually because the surrounding peat was highly prone to collapse and the presence of metal prevented safe use of small excavators. After nearly an hour of careful digging, the team exposed a rectangular metal hatch cover measuring about 1.2 m carts 0.9 m, heavily moss-covered and corroded. The hatch hinges were offset to the right side, consistent with the old hinge sound Cole had described. When attempting to lift the cover, initial resistance was very high due to thick rust and years of soil adhesion, but the hatch eventually popped open to reveal a dark, deep entry leading downward. The survey team immediately deployed gas monitoring equipment to measure methane and hydrogen sulfide levels inside. Concentrations were high enough to cause unconsciousness, but below explosive thresholds, allowing them to lower a probe camera first to assess the subsurface structure. The initial images showed a box-shaped confinement chamber constructed from joined metal plates, no taller than 1.6 meters, about 2 meters wide, with a floor surface mottled with rust and water grooves. The interior walls displayed corrosion and streaking consistent with Cole's description of rough, cold, constantly damp surfaces. In the left corner was a steel anchor ring fixed directly to the floor, and the metal around the ring showed semicircular wear patterns indicating repeated pulling force from a chain or restraint, matching the injuries around Cole's ankles. When forensic personnel entered the chamber for direct inspection, they discovered numerous small scratch marks on the walls and around the anchor ring, interspersed with points of metal flaking. Epidermal cell samples were collected from several locations for DNA testing. At the rear of the chamber, a crude pipe ran downward from above, with steady dripping water producing the drip sound Cole had described vividly in his statement. The leaking pipe also explained the high humidity and poor ventilation conditions, fully consistent with the forensic assessment of Cole's physical state upon recovery. Near the entrance, investigators found a curved steel lip worn smooth, indicating frequent manual opening and closing of the hatch and producing the characteristic squeak of old hinges. Beyond the first confinement chamber, the camera detected a smaller adjacent compartment connected through a narrow gap only about 60 centimeters wide. Upon widening access to the second chamber, the survey team recorded traces of old mechanical equipment, a rusted mini-engine, scattered loose gears, and a narrow metal shelf coated in black oil, similar to the type found on evidence E3. Tool marks on the floor matched implements used for cutting or bending metal, suggesting this was a location where the perpetrator repaired or maintained makeshift structures he had fabricated in the swamp. This smaller chamber also contained numerous faint handprints on the walls, not complete fingerprints, but sufficient for DNA sampling and fingerprint examination. The quantity indicated at least 2 individuals had prolonged contact with the surfaces, consistent with Cole and Mason being held separately in 2 distinct spaces. Several locations on the floor and walls showed long vertical scrape marks, possibly from dragging a heavy object through, differing from where in Cole's chamber, and suggesting Mason had been held in the second chamber or moved through it at certain times. Oil samples, worn metal fragments, and tool marks were all collected for analysis to connect with evidence. E3 and any technical data related to the suspect. Additionally, in a shadowed corner of the second chamber, forensic personnel found several sections of rotted rope with size, color, and twist structure similar to the segment recovered in 2017, reinforcing the hypothesis that E3 had belonged to a restraint or drag tool within the same tunnel system. DNA recovered from the anchor ring surface and flaking points on the main chamber walls matched Cole Whitford's sample, confirming he had been confined there during his disappearance. Meanwhile, several cell samples collected from locations in the secondary chamber were identified as belonging to Mason Hargrave, verifying that Mason had also been brought into this structure prior to his death and burial in the nearby peat sink. The combined data from both chambers, the leaking water system, and the mechanical traces allowed complete corroboration of everything Cole described sensorially: darkness, cold metal floor, dripping water sound, metal door noise, sulfur gas odor, confined space, and repeated foot restraint. With the actual confinement tunnel structure now discovered and fully examined, the case moved beyond speculation to possess a confirmed physical location, replete with evidentiary markers, proving prolonged captivity within the Okefenokee Swamp. The discovery of the detention bunker, along with DNA traces from both Cole Whitford and Mason Hargrave, prompted the investigative command to immediately shift to the phase of consolidating all data to identify the individual responsible for this secret metal structure. The forensic report from the scene indicated a clear match between the physical characteristics of the bunker and the sensory descriptions provided by Cole, but to pinpoint the perpetrator, the investigation team needed to integrate sensory mapping, physical evidence analysis, and peripheral records that had been reviewed in the initial phase. The first reinforced connection was footprint E4. The shoe impression collected in 2017 matched 87% with the pattern of heavy-duty work boots that the AI system identified as having been used by a small number of individuals in the area, among whom only one had multiple recorded instances of unauthorized movement around Okefenokee, Harlan Vickers. At the same time, the estimated weight from soil compression was consistent with Vickers' physical description in ranger records, which described him as a tall, large man weighing over 95 kilograms and typically wearing thick-soled boots suited for mechanical work. The second connection came from evidence E3, the oil-stained rope segment. The chemical signature of the lubricant on the rope matched a sample previously collected at an unauthorized campsite near where Vickers had built his cabin in 2014. A sample that had drawn attention because it contained organophosphorus additives found only in older mechanical equipment. The presence of a rusted mini-engine and old metal components inside the detention bunker further supported the hypothesis that the builder had access to and the ability to repair mechanical devices, aligning with information from scattered local residents who described Vickers as someone who liked to collect broken machinery to tinker with and repair himself. The third connection involved evidence E2, the distinctive 2.3-meter-long mud drag mark. 3D reconstruction modeling confirmed that this mark was consistent with dragging an adult human body in a direction aligning with the discovered bunker location. The southeast drag direction matched that of footprint E4 and fell within the radius where Vickers' cabin had been documented as active. Looking at the composite map, all plausible perpetrator travel routes originated from the area where Vickers' cabin was once located and connected directly to the path leading into the Peat Dome region where the bunker was found. These elements indicated a logical activity path for the sole individual from the original suspect list. The fourth connection stemmed from administrative data. Vickers was the only subject among the 27 individuals screened who could not establish an alibi for September 12, 2017. He had no transaction history, no medical records, no corroborating witnesses, and did not appear on any traffic cameras throughout the month of September. Unlike most off-grid residents who still had minimal interactions with nearby towns. After an exterior inspection of Vickers' wooden cabin, investigators noted that it had been abandoned for an extended period. Grass had overgrown the path, some rusted tools were left outside, and there were no signs of habitation for at least 2 years. This data was cross-referenced with statements from local residents who reported that Vickers would occasionally disappear for weeks at a time, living in isolation from the community and rarely communicating with anyone. One resident even recalled hearing a small engine running at night in the northwestern forest area in 2018, coinciding with the location indicated by sensory mapping as potentially containing a metal structure. When the 4 forensic data groups, footprint, technical oil, drag modeling, and DNA samples from the bunker, were fed into the integrated analysis system, the conclusion was clear. The probability that the evidence originated from any unidentified individual other than Vickers was extremely low, especially since no other subject matched all parameters. Ultimately, the investigation team compiled a unified report officially designating Harlan Vickers as the primary suspect in case OCF 217W, based on the logical chain of evidence, spatial temporal consistency, and technical duplication of physical traces. The report also recommended obtaining a search warrant for Vickers' former cabin and an emergency arrest warrant under Georgia state law for a suspect involved in abduction, unlawful detention, and potential homicide. Both the arrest and search warrants were approved by the Charlton County judge on the same day, marking the first time since 2017 that the case had a specific target for pursuit, based on a scientific investigative foundation, rather than speculation or initial vague search data. Immediately after the arrest and search warrants for Harlan Vickers were approved, the investigation force switched to full-scale active manhunt mode, the largest deployment in the Okefenokee area since 2017. Given the complex swamp terrain and Vickers' likely familiarity with every path, the command team decided to mobilize the Charlton County SWAT team, in conjunction with Georgia State Thermal Drone Units, and K-9 teams specialized in tracking through muddy environments. The operational plan followed a concentric encirclement model, with drones handling aerial surveillance, K-9 units leading scent tracking along high-probability routes, and SWAT serving as blocking and closing forces upon target acquisition. The drone team was deployed first, sweeping the entire northwestern swamp area, the region where Vickers' old cabin was located, and also the intersection point suggested by footprint E4, the drag model, and the bunker location. Within just 20 minutes, one drone detected a thermal anomaly moving at low canopy level, less than 2 meters above ground, with heat signatures consistent with a human moving slowly and deliberately avoiding exposure. Upon re-examination with infrared zoom, analysts observed a blurry image of a man carrying a small backpack, wearing dark clothing, heading deeper into the swamp rather than toward dry land, a clear indicator that the suspect was fleeing and intentionally choosing difficult terrain. The K-9 team was immediately dispatched. The specially trained scent tracking dogs began following the trail from the anomaly position reported by the drone. Within minutes, the K-9 units led forces to a narrow strip of land between 2 soft peat zones where fresh, deep footprints were visible, impressions consistent with Vickers' weight and boot pattern from prior analysis. As SWAT advanced deeper, one point team member spotted a thin metal wire stretched low across the ground, camouflaged under decaying leaves. When a ranger lightly probed the wire with a stick, a crude trigger mechanism activated, launching a heavy nail-studded wooden beam from the other end. This was a primitive but dangerous mechanical trap, proving Vickers had prepared in advance for pursuit. The command team immediately elevated to high caution status, adjusting formation to allow K9 lead while keeping human personnel at a safe distance to avoid triggering additional improvised devices. As the pursuit team pushed into narrower swamp branches, a second drone detected Vickers running across a trembling earth zone where the ground quivered slightly and could collapse under excessive weight. Recognizing the extreme danger, SWAT paused to avoid stepping on unstable mud patches. However, the K9 continued to pick up Vickers' scent and led the team around to a firmer edge, paralleling the suspect's path. While tracked from above, Vickers abruptly changed direction southward into dense brush that blocked visibility and suddenly accelerated, indicating he had become aware of the pursuit. One infrared drone descended for closer tracking, capturing Vickers wading through heavy mud before cutting past a large cypress trunk. For a moment, the thermal signal was obscured, forcing the command team to rely entirely on K9 for continued tracking. About 15 minutes later, K9 brought SWAT to a soft ground area with dense footprints, and the drone immediately reacquired the thermal anomaly, this time stationary within a peat sink. As the team closed in, they observed Vickers attempting to use a large branch for balance while his right leg had sunk deep into soft peat and was steadily being pulled down. Rather than surrendering, Vickers continued struggling to free himself, causing the mud to sink faster around his trapped leg. After assessing collapse risk, SWAT deployed specialized rescue planks to create stable footing and approached the suspect from two directions to minimize additional trap activation. Once close enough, a SWAT member used a safety grappling tool to pull Vickers out of the peat before the ground fully collapsed. Vickers resisted weakly, but lacked the strength to flee further due to exhaustion and minor injuries from the mud entrapment. SWAT immediately applied standard restraints and extracted him from the hazard zone. Upon reaching dry ground, drones switched to wide-area surveillance to ensure no accomplices or additional threats existed. The apprehension was formally logged with precise time and coordinates. The arrest warrant was fully executed, and Harlan Vickers was confirmed taken into custody unarmed, but carrying small items including rope, a folding knife, and several old mechanical tools. Items that further corroborated the investigative model constructed earlier. The manhunt concluded successfully, ending 4 years of suspicion and opening the next phase of judicial investigation into the suspect directly linked to the abduction and homicide of the two trackers in the Okefenokee Swamp. Throughout the first 48 hours after his arrest, Harlan Vickers was isolated and medically monitored to ensure fitness for questioning, while the investigation team cross-referenced Cole Whitford's fragmented statements with data recovered from the detention bunker discovered beneath tree roots at the edge of the Okefenokee Swamp. Their goal was to reconstruct the full criminal sequence from the tracker's disappearance in 2017 to Cole's escape in 2021, establishing a complete unbroken timeline. The forensic map of the bunker was placed alongside Cole's sensory diagram: squeaking hinges, dripping water, cold metal floor, ankle restraints, and intense sulfur odor. All matched almost perfectly with the actual structure of the main chamber and the subcompartment where numerous DNA traces of Cole and Mason were found. This cross-check demonstrated that Cole could not have fabricated the details, as his descriptions were too precise for a space unknown until the bunker was excavated. From this data, the team began reconstructing the perpetrator's sequence of actions. The first step, capture, was determined from drag mark E2 and shoe impression E4 collected at the 2017 scene. Combined with 3D drag modeling, Vickers approached Cole from behind on the morning of September 12, 2017, most likely in an area only a few dozen meters from the main waterway. He used forceful pulling to take down one victim, then hooded and dragged the person southeast, directly along the axis to the bunker site. During this, Mason, traveling with Cole, was likely subdued shortly afterward or blocked from escape. The second step, transport, was established through the alignment between drag direction and the time of signal loss from Cole. Time of movement modeling based on mud density, Vickers' weight and terrain showed he could have reached the bunker entrance within 25–40 minutes of the attack, consistent with the simultaneous disconnection of both Cole's and Mason's radios. The third step, detention, was reconstructed from detailed data on Cole's body. Prolonged muscle atrophy, light deprivation, ankle trauma from restraints, and phased nutritional deficits. Medical reports concluded Cole was held in the main metal chamber, the larger bunker room, for nearly 4 years. Wall and floor wear marks indicated only minimal permitted movement in confined space, matching forensic confirmation of bone and muscle condition. The fourth step, separation, was decoded from Mason's DNA traces in the subcompartment. Cellular samples in the smaller chamber showed Mason had been held there initially. The two separate chambers allowed Vickers to isolate the victims, preventing mutual assistance or escape attempts. Cole's fragmented accounts of hearing Mason in the early days, followed by chaos and then absolute silence, fully aligned with forensics. The subcompartment showed heavy impact marks, and Mason's skull condition indicated blunt force trauma. This led to the determination that Mason was killed approximately 1 to 2 years after capture, consistent with peat layering around the remains. Finally, the fifth step, homicide, was reconstructed from Mason's skeletal data. The long skull fracture and impact characteristics indicated Vickers used a blunt object, very likely a mechanical tool from the subcompartment, to inflict immediately fatal trauma. Vickers then dragged Mason's body out of the bunker, matching drag mark E2 exactly, before burying it in the peat sink, where the remains were discovered in 2021. When all data, DNA, physical evidence, sensory mapping, bunker forensics, and Cole's statements were input into the timeline model, the team produced a seamless event chain from 2017 to 2021. Vickers surveilled the two trackers before their trip, ambushed them on the morning of September 12, separated the victims and confined them in 2 metal chambers, maintained minimal living conditions for Cole over years, killed Mason and concealed the body, continued controlling Cole until the bunker structure degraded. And finally, Cole escaped when the ankle restraint loosened due to metal corrosion. Once the complete timeline was presented, the interrogation team entered direct confrontation with Vickers. Rather than offering inferences, they presented discrete physical data blocks, footprints matching his boots, oil matching equipment he used, victim's DNA inside the bunker, tool marks consistent with items recovered from his old cabin, and his movement routes aligning with geolocation analysis. Cornered by irrefutable evidence, Vickers did not confess but entered prolonged silence, a response the interrogators assessed as indirect confirmation of the constructed timeline. The interrogation summary concluded, the entire behavioral model fit a planned, proactive and sustained criminal sequence in which Vickers was the only individual possessing the means, opportunity, terrain knowledge, and forensic matches across all phases of case OCF 217. W. The trial of Harlan Vickers took place at Charlton County Superior Court under tight security, with a jury of 12 carefully selected after multiple screening rounds due to the exceptionally grave nature of the case. On the first day, the prosecution presented a massive evidence portfolio built over 4 years of reinvestigation, DNA samples of Cole Whitford and Mason Hargrave recovered from the metal detention bunker. Cole's DNA on the ankle restraints and chamber walls, Mason's DNA in the subcompartment, drag marks consistent with body transport, footprint E4 matching Vickers' boot, style and weight. Evidence E3 containing the specific mechanical oil matching samples from Vickers' former cabin area, along with hundreds of scene photographs, 3D bunker models, and sensory mapping results from Cole's fragmented statements. The prosecution then presented the forensic timeline, a chronological reconstruction from 2017 to 2021, demonstrating that Vickers' entire criminal sequence was not random but clearly structured. Surveillance of the two victims before their disappearance, early morning ambush, transport to the metal bunker, prolonged detention, victim separation, Mason's homicide and burial in a peat sink, followed by continued detention of Cole until bunker degradation. During the reconstruction presentation, the jury paid particular attention to the absolute match between Cole's sensory descriptions and the actual bunker. Dripping water, squeaking hinges, cold metal floor, sulfur smell, and confined space. Details, the prosecution emphasized, could not be imagined by someone who had never been inside. The first witness was the forensic pathologist who directly examined Cole's body upon recovery in 2021. He presented layered injury analysis, highlighting prolonged muscle atrophy, reduced bone density, chronic light deprivation, and nutritional deficits, all consistent with controlled confinement in a dark, damp space. When asked whether someone lost in the swamp could exhibit such signs, he answered unequivocally, "Absolutely not. These are the results of years of controlled detention." A geologist then presented data on peat gas and stratigraphic structure at the bunker site, confirming the location could not have formed naturally. Next, an acoustics and sensory mapping expert described converting Cole's fragmented memories into field coordinates, stressing that the data could only match the bunker if Cole had lived inside it for an extended period. A forensic technician detailed how footprint E4 was matched to Vickers' weight and boot type, and how E3 oil analysis led back to the area where the suspect had been documented active. The lead investigator then described the full discovery of the detention bunker, metal hatch buried under tree roots, chamber with ankle restraints, old mechanical equipment, leaking water system, and wear patterns consistent with long-term holding of two victims. When the jury viewed photographs of the ankle restraints and floor wear matching Cole's ankle injuries, many could not conceal their shock. The final witness, Cole Whitford, appeared only briefly per medical request. Cole did not recount the full events, but confirmed key auditory memories, sensations, and the last moments hearing Mason before permanent silence. His hesitations, trembling and long pauses, left the courtroom in absolute silence, while the prosecution asked only 3 targeted questions to affirm facts already proven by forensics. The defense attempted to rebut by arguing that the evidence was largely circumstantial and that Vickers was a reclusive individual, incapable of constructing a complex mechanical structure like the bunker. The prosecution immediately countered with photographs of Vickers' old cabin showing scattered mechanical equipment, combined with resident statements about his engine repairs and homemade trap-making. When defense counsel claimed no direct evidence proved Vickers killed Mason, the prosecution presented skull trauma analysis images matching tools recovered from the subcompartment and wholly inconsistent with any natural swamp accident. After 8 days of trial and more than 4 hours of deliberation, the jury returned to the courtroom and announced their verdict: guilty on all counts. Harlan Vickers was sentenced to double life sentence, no parole for the 3 main charges: first-degree kidnapping, prolonged unlawful imprisonment causing serious injury, and the intentional murder of Mason Hargrave. As the sentence was read aloud, the courtroom fell into near absolute silence, bringing to a close a prosecution process that had lasted nearly 4 years and officially putting a legal end to the Okefenokee case. However, for the investigative agencies, the verdict was not the ultimate conclusion, but rather the moment to review the entire operational process that led to this outcome. Accordingly, case file OCF 217W was moved into the technical investigation summary phase, aimed at systematically evaluating the methods applied, particularly the central role of the sensory mapping model in transforming the victim's fragmented sensory memories into positioning data, thereby narrowing the search area from tens of square kilometers down to geologically and acoustically well-defined suspect zones. The evaluation showed that the accuracy of sensory mapping in swamp environments is limited by variations in natural sound sources. But when combined with peat gas mapping and seepage flow analysis, the method increased positioning efficiency by 62% compared to traditional wide-area searches. In addition, the forensic reprocessing procedure, using 2021 technology, demonstrated the importance of reanalyzing evidence in long-term missing persons cases. The AI footprint identification system enabled the detection of soil compression patterns and shoe sole grooves that could not previously be analyzed manually, thereby linking footwear impression E4 to a specific individual on the suspect list. Next-generation chromatography analysis of oil, E3, allowed tracing of organic phosphorus additives, establishing a connection between the evidence and mechanical equipment previously used by the suspect. 3D modeling of slip mark E2 not only confirmed a drag force consistent with the victim's weight, but also determined a drag direction matching the location of the holding pit, proving the value of nonlinear physical modeling in highly deformable environments such as peat swamps. The deployment of thermal drones over the Okefenokee Swamp was also regarded as a major advancement. Infrared cameras enabled detection of thermal anomalies beneath thick vegetative cover, something the 2017 search teams could not achieve. Drones played a decisive role in both phases, detecting the anomaly that led to the holding pit and pinpointing Harlan Vickers' location during the manhunt, which shortened pursuit time and reduced risks for ground personnel. The K9 unit also demonstrated high effectiveness in complex terrain. Despite mud-distorting tracks, the working dogs were able to follow a scent trail consistent with the suspect's actual movement path, directly supplementing the drone data. In the field of swamp forensics, the case highlighted the need for a new set of standards for environments rich in organic gases and dynamic peat substrates. In Mason Hargrave's case, peat layer analysis not only relatively determined the time of death, but also provided stratigraphic context to assess how the perpetrator concealed the body. Additionally, bone forensics in peat environments requires specialized cleaning and stabilization methods to avoid destroying already weakened mineralized tissue layers. Summarizing these factors, the report proposes 4 major changes to missing persons investigation protocols in U.S. swamp regions. 1. Implement sensory mapping immediately within the first 72 hours. When there is a possibility the victim is being held. 2. Prioritize collection of micro-scale evidence, oils, metal fragments, drag marks, because these samples hold high value when reanalyzed with new technology. 3. Include thermal drones as mandatory equipment in all swamp search operations to detect anomalies beneath vegetation canopies. 4. Establish a dedicated swamp forensics unit to standardize evidence handling methods in peat environments where traditional parameters are easily distorted. Case OCF 217W proves that combining sensory analysis, evidence reprocessing, and modern surveillance technology can transform a stalled missing persons file into a complete criminal investigation, paving the way for more effective investigative procedures in the most complex natural environments of the United States. The story of case OCF 217W is not only an exceptionally complex criminal file, but also reflects very real challenges in modern American life, where vast wilderness and independent lifestyles remain an important part of the culture. The disappearance of Cole Whitford and Mason Hargrave in the Okefenokee Swamp illustrates a harsh reality. Even the most skilled survivalists can fall into danger when confronted with unpredictable factors, in this case, not nature itself, but another human being. One of the most important lessons comes from the fact that the 2 trackers lost contact just minutes after their last signal. In the United States, many people enjoy outdoor activities alone or in pairs, but the case underscores the importance of clearly communicating routes, establishing mandatory check-in timeframes, and using positioning devices capable of sending emergency signals even without cellular coverage. Relying solely on standard two-way radios left the rescue team without strong location data when they went missing. Another lesson stems from how perpetrator Harlan Vickers concealed himself in a remote area, leaving almost no trace for many years. This reflects the reality in some rural parts of the U.S., where the line between solitary living and dangerous behavior can sometimes be very thin. The fact that the community and authorities often only noted Vickers' minor individual behaviors without connecting them highlights the importance of building inter-regional data systems to track individuals exhibiting unusual patterns around public spaces or nature preserves. The story also emphasizes the value of technology in modern investigation and rescue operations. Without thermal drones, sensory mapping models, or AI-assisted evidence reanalysis, the case might never have been solved. In reality, every family with members who enjoy exploring nature should consider equipping satellite-based positioning devices, while national park agencies should maintain budgets for environmental monitoring technology. Finally, perhaps the most important lesson is this. Sometimes the smallest signs, a patch of mud, a scrap of fabric, or a fragmented memory, can save a life and deliver justice. This reminds us that in a vast society like the United States, vigilance, attention to detail, and the willingness to listen to victims are always the key to protecting the community. Thank you for following this entire gripping case-solving journey. If you want to continue exploring authentic investigative stories full of cautionary value like the Cole and Mason case, please hit subscribe so you don't miss the next video. See you again in new journeys, where every small detail can change an entire life.